So I've come to talk about this. I've also come to talk about a number of other things. As we go along, you'll see what I have to do here, if I can, is give you some sense of not only how what's in the book and what my research has kind of revealed over the past 7 years, but also to reveal to you the nature of how the way your mind works and how minds work in general. We're going to focus on the word mindfulness here because, in fact, the classic definitions are paying attention on purpose in the present, noticing new things and being sensitive to context. I promise you, you don't do this, okay? And here's the test. When you were in the shower this morning, how many of you were actually in the shower this morning? Or how many of you were actually taking a shower and thinking about what you had to do next? Now you're talking. You thought you were in the shower, that is, your body was in the shower, but you didn't notice the water running down the back of your neck. You barely noticed the temperature after you fixed it on the tap. And in fact, you actually weren't there because the shower provides you a way of dreaming about your day. Mindfulness takeaway number 1. Tomorrow when you get in the shower, be in the shower. Okay? Just stay there for a moment. You don't have to stay there for the whole time you're there, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. Be there for 1 minute. I guarantee you that it'll be hard for you to do. It's not the way our minds are built. It's not the way we're socialized and trained. So do it, okay? This is my first takeaway of the day. I'm commanding you to have a nice shower tomorrow morning and to actually be there when you're having the shower. Notice the water, notice the temperature, notice how your body is feeling. I promise you, this is a terrific exercise. You do it every day. You'll learn to be more mindful in your lives. Now, I want you to look differently as the way we operate as human beings, not at our words and intentions, but at the silent forces at work in our minds. Now, I pluralize the word mind here because it represents, practically speaking, the last 30 years of neuroscience research, right? So we have two minds at work in our lives every day. We just don't often realize that. And I'm hoping that you'll realize that by the time I get done today. And I hope this morning I'll be able to get you to pay attention on purpose to what's actually happening now. And I hope you'll become more sensitive to the context in which you are and how context generally affects the way we behave every day. I promise you it does. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to convince you that that's a reality in 30 minutes, but I'm going to try. I want to talk about this creature between our ears here, right? This is the powerhouse that actually runs our lives. It's a huge information processor that sends out 1 quadrillion instructions, that's 1 quadrillion per second, through a network of brain cells and neurons that are connected to each other, okay? We can't even conceive about how complex this is. These connections, called synapses, are created in order to process 11 million bits of incoming information per second. Each thing we know is embodied in a separate network of these neural connections. It ends up creating somewhere around 1,000 trillion synapses, connections to store all this information. Now, just to give you a sense of the size of this storage system, I want you to see what 60 neurons could do. Just 60 little pinheads of information that connect to each other up to 10 to the 81st power. Can you conceive of what 10 to the 81st power looks like? This is what it looks like. That's a 10 with 81 zeros after it. As far as we know, the estimate of all the known particles in the universe is only about 1/10 that size. We just don't get the idea that the smallest parts of our ongoing system behind here, this huge information processor, are not only very small but also very densely packed. There's just more stuff going on here than we're prepared to think about. Most of the input that we're processing here is visual, okay? And our natural assumption has been that way for thousands of years, is that all this is about our conscious brain. Thoughts, speech, sense of self, all that other good stuff. Our mind is our conscious brain. The trouble is that we've held this single mind rational view of it for millennia, as long as people have been philosophizing about the nature of choice and the nature of action. And of course, since rationality is the basis of Western culture and management theory, ideally, we see that as the basis for, I mean, look around at all the courses here. They're all based on your logical, rational mind's notion of how to acquire a particular set of skills in order that you will do differently and be different. So, of course, we expect all of our managers' decisions to be grounded in deliberate choices. We want you to think about them, right? And then we want them to be thoughtfully communicated. See how that works? Because that's not even remotely the way the brain works, and that's not actually remotely what you do. I know you think that's what you do. That's what good cultural learning is about. But it is not actually what happens. And the ones who are giggling about this know that they have managers who haven't had a thought in 20 years and don't communicate in any thoughtful fashion either. Mindful manager shows you how we really make decisions, and it's not the way this guy does, okay? This is our ultimate cultural fantasy here. He says your logic is seriously flawed. No, it has to do that Vulcan brains are not built the way human brains are. It's not about the logic of the brain, it's about the structure of the brain and the relationship between the two minds. So keep this guy in mind here, because he's been held up to be an ideal for a very long time as a kind of pop version of what our fundamental cultural vision of thinking is all about. This is actually the way it works. Our brain actually evolved from the brainstem. Early creatures that resemble us start off with the fundamental body regulation systems that we all have: fight, flight, rest, digest systems, right? And then, of course, what happens over evolutionary period is a good-sized chunk of gray matter gets put on top of that, called the limbic brain. This has a series of organs that manage our emotional reactions and our emotional learning, okay? This is the first time as creatures we can actually remember, if I eat this, I'm okay. My friend ate that and he died yesterday, don't eat that, okay? Simple stuff. And then a remarkable thing happened, only to us as creatures in the evolutionary period, and that is a layer of other gray matter got put on top of all of this called the neocortex, and we began to become higher thinkers. This is why we have such a complicated communication and relationship life, because there really are two brains working here, because what we do is we actually combine the midbrain, the emotional brain, and the brainstem into one, right? Because they interact perfectly. So in fact, we've had 30 years of neuroscience, people put into fMRI machines, and we discovered that, gee, this stuff is actually working independently of our thoughts. So we have two brains, not one to create a reality, a conscious, rational mind that we know about, the one that we all ask people, so where did you get that thought from? You inevitably say, I got it from the last thought I had. Wrong. You don't know where that last thought come from. It's just there. And you think you actually thought that thought. So it's hard to get people in a conscious state to actually think about how they think. Because as soon as they think about they're only thinking about the thinking part of the brain, right? And they don't realize that, in fact, most of the thoughts that appear available to your thinking actually don't come from that part of the brain. They come from your unconscious or emotional mind, the midbrain, that we don't know because it operates without words every moment. And here's the big one I want you to get. We cover this in my course, and it's covered in the book, without which we could not speak normally or make decisions. I know you have a ton of courses here on critical thinking and rational decision making. Do any of these courses include a detailed overview of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman? Have you ever run across this book in your courses? Because if you haven't, that means your courses are about 30 years behind what we actually know about how people think. Daniel Kahneman is the only psychologist to ever win a Nobel Prize in economics. Why? Because he actually finally displayed in great detail that, of course, we are not rational decision makers. We are decision makers, but it doesn't operate in the way that classic economic theory thinks. For that, you can get a Nobel Prize if you work at it for 30 years, and he did. Our emotional mind does most of the heavy lifting in our everyday thinking. We don't notice its power, it's always there because we can't talk to it. That's not the way it communicates with us. It communicates through the body. It communicates through the biochemistry of emotion. And rather than call them the conscious and unconscious minds for the rest of the presentation, what I like to use is a visual metaphor so you'll understand the power and the strength differences between these two minds. Guess which one of these is actually the emotional mind? 5 tons, working elephant, ridden by a guy who's 110 pounds with a pointy stick. It's the same thing in life. That elephant works with that guy on top, that little guy on top, with way less power than it has because of deeply learned habits. In the world of working elephants, that elephant has been trained since it was born to take orders from the guy with the pointy stick. In our lives, that powerful elephant mind that has all the emotions and puts all the power of choice behind what you do rationally also works on basic habits, except that unlike the real world, the evolution worked the other way. The rational mind evolved to be able to manage a little bit the emotional mind, but the emotional mind really has all the power there is. And it does most of the work. Man, we don't ever, not ever, we rarely actually get in its way. Now I'll show you when we do it and how we have to do it. That's what the word mindful means. It means getting in the way of the automatic responses of this powerhouse that actually does most of the work for us every day. So let's talk about the rider mind for a moment. It's the home of our speech, our thought, and our self. The functions are located in the prefrontal cortex, this piece of work here, about 2 inches behind your forehead. And It's where your sense of self is. That makes us unique among the creatures in the world. We actually think we can see ourselves from inside our own heads. No other creature can do this. We have distance from ourselves. It's also home of the executive functions. That is, from time to time, we can actually exercise control over the powerful elephant. Right? And I'll show you when and where and how we can do that. Now, it has tremendous strengths and limitations. The most important thing is the writer can use words to create if this, then this thinking. This is critical thinking of the highest order. This is problem solving. This is what we do. This makes us unique in the world of creatures. In fact, it's allowed us to dominate the world of creatures. But there's also some interesting limitations. The writer mind processes information very, very slowly. It's the Commodore 64 of information processing. There's no doubt about it. Handles only a few bits of information, about 40 bits of information per second. It's a messy mind. Right? It's distracted by new input. It's distracted by too much input, simply being busy with something else. Because, of course, once it's overwhelmed by these various elements, like tiredness and drugs and alcohol, then the elephant gets to say whatever it wants, right? There is no executive control here. And my favorite one is more subtle than this. When trying to concentrate on a task, an unread email in your inbox can reduce your effective IQ by 10 points. Everybody get that? So what happens when you're getting 50 emails a second in your inbox? You can see what happens here. This is why Daniel Levitin has a great book called The Organized Mind. Multitasking doesn't work, guys. Because conscious thought is really hard work. Just to focus the mind requires real work. And deliberate thinking requires even more slow and effortful work. In fact, when you're really working, when you're really thinking about stuff, your brain is burning more glucose, more body sugar, than any other organ of the body, right? And so by the end of the day, you feel like this. Bad report day, bad customer day, and my favorite one, doing your taxes. Let me just kill myself, right? So you know how it feels when your body's low because it's actually worked really hard. This takes a lot of energy, right? Which is why, of course, we don't often use it. In fact, if we had to think about everything we ever had to say and do, we'd actually walk like we're part of the zombie apocalypse. It would all be halting and slow. That's not the way our minds work at all. Because, of course, we never ride alone. We're always riding the elephant. And for most of us, most decisions are not deliberate. They need to be made with speed because they need to be made in the moment. Because the writer mind has several key purposes. The first thing it needs to know in every situation is what's going on here and what's going to happen next. These are fundamental physical survival questions that have turned into social psychological survival questions in the past, 10,000 years of human existence. But they were always there as physical survival questions. More interestingly, how am I being treated here is the third critical question. That truly is human because, again, we can see ourselves. We know how we think about ourselves, and therefore we know how people react to us, and it's important to us that they actually react to us in particular kinds of ways. And why is the other purpose? The writer needs to speak and act with flow. When we don't have a fluid exchange of communication, inevitably the other person begins to think that we're either stupid or we're uncertain about what we're trying to do, or worse than that, we're trying to deceive them. The number one rule about lying is that liars slow down. The reason they slow down is because they're thinking about what they have to say next. They also say fewer words. Why? It's easier to remember the lie if you say fewer words. All of this, of course, has nothing to do with natural speech. Natural speech is instantaneous and fluid, and that's what the writer's in charge of. Now, of course, the writer has evolved to conserve energy and to avoid leaving us lost in thought in every moment. And as neuropsychologists say, the scientific stuff is it's slow and lazy. I always love when neuropsychologists get down to the real stuff. Okay, after my 14,000 page treatise on the mind, turns out it's basically slow and it's basically lazy. Thank you very much. Let's move on to the real mind. Because without us noticing it, it leans on the elephant mind and its constant flow of impressions, feelings, and judgments that get delivered from its ongoing processing of what's around us. Right? We just don't realize this. This is where the other thought comes from. I told you that you actually can't explain. It's just there. We are plausible decision makers. In fact, what Kahneman says is we're always jumping to conclusions based on relatively poor data. In fact, he said, I'm going to use the ugliest acronym in the world, WYSIATI, is the way to explain this. What you see is all there is. And in most of your daily decision making, this is it. Visual information matters most. So let's talk about this creature. Look, there's more stuff going on here. First of all, it's the home of your long-term personal memories, but it's also the home of all of your habits and the general habits that you're watching in other people in the society. How did you think that you learned to speak? Does your mother put you in a class at somewhere between 1 and 2 years of age? The way she would put you in a violin class so you learn how to do violin? Is that how you learn to speak? Of course not. You learn to speak by watching other people speak. How did you learn your vocabulary? Do you know that from about year 1 on, when you form your first word, your non-conscious mind, your elephant, is taking in 9 words a day without telling you? Because we now know by the time you get out of high school, you can access about 55,000 words. You do the math, it's about 9 words a day. Nobody consciously learns 9 words a day. It's done for you automatically. Children already know stuff by the time they're 1 about the language that is so amazing that pediatric neurologists can hardly believe it. They know how to sort out the sounds between. What happens when you hear a new language? What's the first thing that actually makes you crazy? It's too fast, and it all runs together. That's how babies are when they come out of the womb. By 1 year, they have that sorted, right? Can you imagine? No one taught them how to do this. It turns out we're wired for it, right? We're also wired to absorb new words. Oh, and for all of you who have babies, are you talking to your children? How many have young babies, babes in arms? Good. So, when they were in your arms, did you do baby talk? Too bad. You have to work harder now. Because it turns out that's also wired into most people and into most cultures. In all cultures, people do baby talk. And the reason is because it begins to train the brain in listening to vowels. Baby talk is all vowels, right? Oh, it's all that stuff. I get to practice because, in fact, within 2 weeks, I'm going to be a grandfather for the first time. So I get to practice my theory here, so it'll be really great. I'm looking forward to making this kid the smartest kid in the world. Anyway, you get the idea. The other thing, we also have tremendous data to indicate that if you don't speak to your child between 1 and 5 very much, you actually disadvantage them when they go to school. Because you only learn words and vocabulary by hearing them spoken. And the more you speak to your child, the more likely you are to hear them. We call it the 32 million word gap. Working in lower class families speak to their children when they need to be told what to do. But they rarely speak to them about ongoing events. Javon and I live downtown at Yonge and Eglinton. There are more babies in carriages than you can possibly think of. And the mothers are walking by and they never stop talking. Right? That's exactly the right thing to do. Because that's how the baby learns to process words without you knowing that that's what they're doing. Worst thing I can see is when a mother's in the local Starbucks and the baby's in the stroller and the baby's going, and the mother's on the phone. This is a problem. Right? You've got to keep talking to your kids. And it's all going in there whether we want it to know it. The other thing goes in there is what we call cultural schema. That is the fundamental patterns about how human beings get along in every situation you've ever seen. You know how to manage from the moment that you actually have a teacher in front of a classroom. From the moment that you think of the principal's office as some distant, fearsome place that you have to go when you're bad. Right? From the first time that your mother told you off in front of the dining room table because you did something stupid. Or your father stood up and said, stop that. You know how to manage. Because that's the fundamental cultural archetype of management. Be in control of people, tell them what to do. And everybody knows that before they get their first job, I promise. And that's where you learn it, is down deep inside as part of your long-term memory system. The other thing that the mind does is it instantly makes decisions. This is where all the tricky stuff comes from. As the stuff is coming through your eyes and through your other sense organs, your amygdala is actually making decisions about what's right and what's wrong, what will work and what will not work. And I've just said all this kind of stuff. And just as a kind of interesting irony here, does anybody know how old this room actually is? Is it late 19th century? Is it early 20th century? Don't you think it's odd that I'm in here speaking about 21st century science in a room that in fact is more than 100 years old? Because in fact, so is our concept of management too. So there's something ironic about the fact that I'm in a room that actually epitomizes the underlying cultural archetypes that you never think about, but that actually drive the way people fundamentally manage. It's all very 19th century. Our words of perceptions that come in are instantly tagged with positive and emotional energy and stuck in the right places in the various networks in our brain. For instance, instant processing by this little creature here, the amygdala. Just behind the ears on each side. It does all the work. It oversees all input, communicates its decisions in 2 directions. Every 200 milliseconds, it's doing this kind of stuff. A flood of impressions, intuition, judgments, and feelings to the rider. Those are those other thoughts come from. And more interestingly, surges of emotional energy to the body's self-regulation. Flight, fight. We've been separating out the body from the mind for way too long in our culture. Right? Your body has exquisite, I love that phrase, one of my favorite biologist phrases, has exquisite responses to the surrounding situation. Exquisite means they're highly detailed and they're instantaneous and they work in ways you can't even think. This is your rider mind on elephant, okay? This is what's happening to it every freaking second. In fact, less than that, every 200 milliseconds. So because that's going on, because it's so overwhelming, we need to take a little mindful moment here, okay? So I need everybody to sit back in their chairs. I'm going to give you your first major takeaway of the day. Everybody sit back in their chairs, be comfortable, relax your shoulders. We're going to learn a quick version of the conscious calming breath here, okay? To do that, I really do need you to do an interesting thing with your hands, okay? I need you to put them together like this. I know it seems silly and it takes you all back to your childhood. That's a really good thing. This bottom finger here, this goes in your belly button, okay? Put it in your belly button. Now let your hands relax over that part of your belly. I only do this to get your hands in the right place, okay? So let your hands relax on your body. They're all in the right place now. Now I need you to do something you probably wouldn't think of doing on the beginning of a business day, but here we are. I need you to close your eyes. Close your eyes, please. Now I need you to breathe in through your nose slowly, and I want you to push your hands out. You're breathing into the bottom of your lungs, and you're pushing out your diaphragm, okay? Ready? Breathe in through the nose. I'll count. 2, 3. Hold it for a moment. Now breathe out slowly, push your hands in. Do another one. Breathe in, push your hands out. And then breathe out, push your hands in. One more. Breathe in through the nose, push your hands out. And push your hands in, breathe out. Pause for a moment. Listen to the room. Okay, thank you. You do this several times a day. I promise you, you're going to save your life. Because without that kind of persistent effort to take over one of the functions the elephant runs automatically, the breathing, which has been done for thousands of years in other cultures, you actually can't quiet the mind. Right? This is the whole point here. That stillness you heard in the room is actually the stillness I want to be in your mind, at least several times a day. Also in the course, we're going to show you how to use that instantaneously on the way into a bad meeting. Right? So in fact, you can calm yourself before bad stuff actually happens. It focuses your rider for a moment, and that's what you need to do. Turns out, Dr. Spock has it right here. If you do this, you will live long and prosper. It's the only good thing he said on the show. The rest of it was that stuff about logic. Now, the elephant is very sensitive to changes in our environment. It's primed to respond to every minor change. That's why your body has such exquisite responses to minor changes in the environment that you don't even notice. Somebody walks in the room and raises an eyebrow, and your body's already responding to this. I promise you, this actually is what happens. So remember all those schema we mentioned earlier, all those fundamentally deep learned habits? They're all in there, and they're all acting to assess the situation, to figure out what's going on, what's going to happen next, and how am I being treated here. And when these cues appear, and they do in every situation, then of course we act without making conscious decisions. We have a ton of experimentation, which I won't do now. I can show you how we can actually get people to do things they haven't thought about doing by just simply making a minor change in their situation as they sit down in the situation, as they walk into the situation. But let's just do something that you all recognize. Time to go to the airport, okay? Time to use both your minds in a really obvious way. The rider actually organizes the trip to the airport. This is you looking at the ticket going, oh my God, the plane is leaving at 6 o'clock. You know what that means. That means the traffic's going to be miserable. I have to go a certain kind of route. I have to be there in time for security. All those are conscious if this, then this decisions. Finally, you get it all sorted out. You plan the route. You get in the car. You turn on the key. You're out the door, and the elephant takes over. Most of your driving is done automatically. You're also breathing, blinking, sitting up straight in the car. You don't think about any of these things, although you could. How about daydreaming on the way to the airport? What's going to happen next? Did I actually leave the stuff off at home? Did I talk to my wife before I left? All that stuff happens automatically. Deciding if the driver in the next lane is actually crazy. and moving over a lane. Your peripheral vision tells you an enormous amount. Instantly your elephant goes, excuse me, and it moves over a lane, keeping a safe distance from the car in front of you. And my favorite one, ask my wife, she'll tell you this, not anticipating slowdowns, those are automatic. Cursing the drivers around you. It's one of my favorites. You freaking idiots, right? Happens all the time, comes out of my mouth. She thinks it's actually distracting me from my driving. It's actually part of my driving. That's because it's being run by a different part of my mind. Right? It's not being run by my conscious rational mind. It's being run by the automatic creature behind all of that. One clear example. I step out of our condo down at Yonge and Egg a couple of years ago when we're down there. I step out into a quiet side street with a cross. I'm walking along the westbound, I'm walking eastbound on East-West Street. I look up, and there's a woman pulls up in front of me on the opposite side of the intersection. She's coming westbound, okay? I can see that she's at the stop sign, there's no other cars, that she's highly involved in a conversation. She's gesticulating, she must be wearing phones, or she has a paired thing. She's just going crazy. And then she makes the left-hand turn without any hands. Who's driving the car? All the guys in the room knew who's driving the car. Your knees are driving the car. Who's driving your knees? Your elephant. It all requires multi-layered decision making, and guess what? This is what your elephant brain actually looks like. It looks much more like a cloud computing farm than it does like a Commodore 64. Millions and trillions of bits of information per second happening all the time. Now, what's the elephant's purpose? We talked about the rider's purpose, what's going on, what's going to happen next, how am I being treated here? The elephant's purpose, as we now know, is to engage you with other people. We now know that the basic drive of human beings is not to compete with each other. If you think about how illogical that is, evolutionarily speaking, you'll realize this, right? Because the business books all say the first thing human beings got to do is to get out and fight for resources. Yeah, with whom? You mean you against the saber-toothed tiger? Don't you have to have friends to do this? Don't you have to have a family? Wouldn't you like to have children so that in fact there'd be more people around after you lose to the next saber-toothed tiger? I'm afraid connection comes first. The neural circuits in the brain light up about connection between human beings within 2 weeks of a baby's being born. We now know this. We've tested for it. The elephant is rewarded by certainty, compliments, choice, and consideration from others. And are we having people in the room when we do this? No. If you haven't had your first MRI yet, you'll enjoy this sometime. You're rolled into a gigantic machine, makes enormous amounts of noise. You have a cage around your head, and there's a little screen here that sends you graphic and text prompts, and that's how we light up different elements of your brain that are at the non-spoken level. This is basic, guys. This is the neural stuff. It's also, of course, has its second purpose, which is to protect you. In the pursuit of connection, it's not going to let you do this at any cost. Two things it actually can't bear. We are wired as creatures to fear uncertainty. Why do you think we show that little picture in the haunted house where the woman in the upstairs opens up the basement door? What do you think happens in your brain at that particular moment? What's the first thing that you can remember yourself saying? Don't go down those stairs. It's used all the time because it's a standard reaction we get to the dark, right? And uncertainty is the most important sense of dark. The other thing, of course, is there's a learned social skill from our first year onwards, and that is as we're developing a sense of self and we begin to see it in ourselves by year 2 and really be able to name it by year 3, we become wary of the way we're treated. And any threat to that sense of self that we have instantly triggers off a whole series of defensive neural reactions. Now, I said before, it's primed to serve with cues to react to any situation, one of which is to protect you in a non-social situation. That happens to protect you physically. That's why it drives the car. That's why it keeps you away from the cars in front of you. But it also, of course, does this for you psychologically. And this is how it does it. The average eye blink takes 300 milliseconds. The elephant can size up a person's look, intentions, attractiveness, likability, trustworthiness, competence, and aggressiveness in 100 milliseconds. 100 milliseconds, a third of an eye blink, and your mind has already made up its mind and pushes it to your rider about what's actually going on here. You know what's going to happen at the end of the next sentence before the sentence happens because that's how you're able to respond. You're able to say the right words with the right gestures, with the right tone of voice, because you already know how to do this. And it all comes from inside of you. And it's the cue here is whatever they're saying and however they're saying it. Your elephant mind knows how to respond to that because you've been learning how to do that your whole life. So it lets you know what's going on, and it's primed to respond with flow, a very cool technique. But there's a hidden catch in all this technique about speed here. I want you to get this, right? Most of our thoughts and impressions are being presented to us by a mind that reads people and reads situations way faster than we can think about it, okay? That means what you see in your mind at the moment you're seeing somebody else is actually not about that somebody else. It's about your mind processing through your past, your judgments about who they are. These are habitual reactions to situations that our elephant has seen before, because you've seen it all before, I promise you. It's always reading, it's always flooding the reader with choices. And here comes the punchline I want you to notice. We mostly act on cues and context, not conscious choice about what to do next. Okay? You're all being really polite here because you understand the context. You know what's going on. You know how to look at me, you know how to pay attention, you know how to nod in the right places. You grimace once in a while, that leaves me a little uncertain, but you get the idea here, right? Also, the other thing you need to be aware of too is the elephant mind is driven by one primal law of evolution: bad is stronger than good. Okay? We already know this, that in fact the fundamental learning that the elephant went through back in the days of the moments when we stepped out of the cave onto the velds to fight the saber-toothed tigers is that things can eat you. And it's better to avoid bad things than avoid lunch. You can always get more lunch. If you don't avoid a bad thing, you'll become lunch. So in fact, we have this underlying process here that automatically says what's going on in the next moment, but tends to focus on the negative and move us to act accordingly. Now this happens as a result of all this. Now I'm going to move it to the workplace. I don't know if you remember, in 1999, a book called First Break All the Rules was put up by Marcus Buckingham. He's a major consultant for the Gallup Institution. Gallup does all the major surveys on worker and employee engagement. Right? The number one shocking result is that when they put the data out in 1999, everybody was horrified to find out that only 26% of North American workers, particularly, this was a US study, but it's the same thing for Canada, only 26% could actually say without a hint of a doubt that they were engaged in their work. Everybody else was moderately engaged or violently disengaged, right? The bottom 19%. 55% were just walking around. In fact, the interesting joke in my business is shortly after the book came out, the word presenteeism showed up in consulting talk. Presenteeism means the people who are walking around because their brains are someplace else and their hearts are someplace else, but they're doing the minimum to get by, right? This is what happens in a workplace that is driven by ancient archetypes about how to manage, right? Now you're thinking, well, how would we know this? Well, the recent summary that was put out by Gallup shows you that they have been working for 14 years because they make a lot of money off this survey, and they also make a lot of money off of consulting. We all did. As soon as I got those 12 questions, first thing I did is I ran into Peter's. I think Peter Azari was still doing it then. I can't remember if it was Peter. Or, anyway, I told Elaine, I said, Elaine, I got a new course for the program. It's called Employee Engagement, the manager's course. You've seen it? Because it's been taught for that many years, right? I'm 100 years old, and that course has been taught for at least 50 of them. I'm kidding. The course this began around the year 2000. It's still being taught today. It's being taught by my business partner, Mark Norman, from the past, right? He's a fine teacher. The original one called Facilitative Leadership, that one actually happened in 1999. That was my first course for SEEC. But when I got those 12 questions, I could finally answer managers who would come up to me after a course of high-powered thinking about how to be a better person/manager and say, what do you actually want me to do? And the answer is, first of all, be clear about people are supposed to be doing for their work. And give them the tools to do that work right. Really? Yeah, really. Turns out only 26% of the people in the nation can actually say they know what they're doing and they actually have the tools to do it right. And show a little care here, right? Say thank you once in a while. What do you think managers said to me when I said, have you said thanks to your employees in the past week? Because that's one of the questions from the survey. What do you think they said? They said no. They provided a reason. What's the reason you don't say thank you to your employees?
They get paid to do the job.
That's what they get paid for. They get paid to do good work. Why should I thank them for good work? That is an ancient cultural stereotype or archetype about how to manage. I want you to keep that in mind because that's actually what they said to me in the classroom. And I kept my horror intact and I taught them about how to be more appreciative leaders, right? But the reason I wrote this book is because I don't think it worked very well, all of my teaching and all of Gallup's teaching and all of the hundreds and hundreds of other consulting firms that made a fortune in the intervening 14 years. America in particular spends about the GDP of 3 small nations every year to train. The question is, no one knows whether the training works or not. In this particular case, we have numbers. This is the survey from 2012. That's how much we move the needle on engagement. 4 freaking %. As I say, really? What's going on here, right? And what's going on here happens in the same issue of their report, a separate rant by their CEO, Jim Clifton. He happens to say things that intersect with the operation of the unconscious mind. At the time he wrote, it had nothing to do with that. He was actually just saying what he thinks is wrong and why managers actually can't manage effectively to engage employees. He said most people are miserable at work because nobody can answer question 1. People aren't clear about their work. They don't know what they're doing. You know what happens when that happens? What did I tell you about the unconscious mind? Our fear of uncertainty is stimulated. When we go to work and we don't know what's going on, we have to keep talking to people about, so are we supposed to be doing this? Are we supposed to be doing that? Are we in charge of this? Does this mean this? All of that just keeps rerunning the fear of uncertainty that the elephant always feels in a situation where it doesn't know what's going to happen next. And all this floods into your rider mind. Second thing is, managers cannot show they care. That's actually question number 6. If you can't show anybody you care, then the fear of social ridicule, which I told you is one of the other protective functions of the elephant mind, is always in play. You're just never sure. When we fear, we're wary. We hesitate, we back off, and if we can't leave the situation, most employees can't walk, we actually disengage. It's easy. You just do as little as possible, keep your head down, and keep going. We're not stupid. Because employees, besides learning the fundamental archetypes about how managers are supposed to behave badly towards them, also learn the basic employee stereotype, which is if you keep your head down and you do just enough to get by, it'll be okay. They're not going to fire you because they can't find anybody as valuable as me because I've been here not doing anything for 20 years. I always love training places where I'd walk in and I'd say, so how are you training your workers? Well, we let them follow the supervisor around, let them follow senior workers around. I say, oh, great, 20 more years of bad habits learned right there on the spot. Right? We become the walking indifferent. Everybody does. Can you imagine, after 14 years, the most we can do is raise the engagement scores by a crummy 4%. Because disengagement happens automatically and quickly, and it's persistent. If you remember what I said earlier, that we need certainty, elephants need certainty. You don't tell people what to do their job. They feel what to do. Work comes naturally to people. I hate to tell you, people actually like to work. And they particularly like to work when they're motivated. And when they're motivated is in a situation where they actually feel they can trust the people around them and trust their manager. So if we create trustworthy situations, clarity and support, that means the elephant mind and the rider mind would be aligned, and that would release the energy of emotion and everybody be engaged. So we should create trust-inducing situations as managers, don't you think? Everybody say yes. Thank you very much. You don't have to believe me, just say yes. So we're gonna show you how to do that. But first, I want to show you something else. Ready?
Hit you hallelujah, girls hit you hallelujah, girls hit you hallelujah, cause Uptown Funk don't give it to you, cause Uptown Funk don't give it to you, cause Uptown Funk don't give it to you, Saturday night and we in the spot, don't believe me, just watch, come on.
Okay, that was just a blatant attempt to make you smile, and I made you smile, so now I want you to do something for me. I want you to turn to the person right next to you, and I want you to shake their hand and say, hi, how are you? Just do it right now. And if you're not beside somebody, get up and shake somebody's hand, okay? That's a command. Good. And did you get that moment? That's like the silence moment around the conscious calming breath. Here's the takeaway. You already know how to do this stuff. You've been doing this stuff since you learned how to talk to your mom, right? If we already know how to do this, the question is, what is it? Well, of course, I'm a social psychologist. I can't leave anything be simple, right? It's called Connect Talk in my model. And what Connect Talk is, it begins with a very ritual that you know how to do and that you're all smilingly doing, shaking hands. It begins with simple greetings carried out with pleasant, polite, positive anticipation, emotional positive anticipation. Now, this is not dependent on personality. If you're the kind of person who is actually slightly introverted and you don't feel like running around the room and shaking hands and smiling with people, which is why, by the way, I put the CAD video up, just so I would overcome that little limitation, then in fact, at least focus on politeness and positive anticipation. You can do that much, right? Because in fact, when that happens, a remarkable thing happens in the elephant brain. This is your rider brain now. The elephant instantly goes, oh, it's going to be open here. And there's not going to be any automatic judgment. So I don't have to be worried about threatening to my sense of self. And we can start talking. So we exchange stories about the events in the room, ourselves, whatever it is. We ask questions, we listen. It's the basis of all fundamental human talk. And you guys think it's just words. Oh boy, it's not just words. John Gottman, you know who John Gottman is? John Gottman's been working on how couples talk to each other for the past 30 years. He is so good at coding the most minimal exchanges between husband and wives that he can watch you talk for 30 minutes in his lab and predict whether your marriage is going to survive the next 18 months or not. That's how powerful he is. Right? He has a coding system and a series of coders that do in real time what your elephant mind does all the time when it's actually talking to somebody. If you have a relationship where you have 5 positive exchanges for every conversation, for any negative exchange or neutral or non-responsive exchange, your marriage is likely to survive. A couple of years later, he goes back and asks them, how you going? He said, we're doing well. He looked at him again, 5-1, and they say they can trust each other. And when that doesn't happen, let me give you a hint, guys. Attacking your wife or being rude to her does keep your marriage going a little longer. You're thinking, what? It's a remarkable thing. Because, of course, when you're engaged in not liking each other, it means you're engaged. Ask any divorcing couple. They'll tell you this for sure. It's what happens when you ignore her. It turns out that in marriages headed for divorce, that's the 0. Men ignored their wives' efforts to make small talk about 82% of the time. In marriages that were stable, they only did this about 19% of the time. Now, this means you don't have to be perfect as human beings, but if you build up this relationship between 5-1, so when you say, honey, pass the ketchup, and she goes, sure, that's a positive, right? Simple, dumb stuff. On the other hand, when she says, or when you say, honey, please pass me the ketchup, you say, get your own damn ketchup. That's a negative one. And of course, just so you'll know, if you say, please pass me the ketchup, and she picks up her phone, then you're in serious trouble here. Because it turns out that actually ignoring human beings, being contemptuous, is one of the most powerful negative emotions there is, also in relationships where there was a tremendous amount of ignoring each other. Whoever got ignored most got sick most often. It beats up your immune system. It's a collaborative moment. All talk is collaboration. We basically learned symmetrical communication. We provide each other about the same number of words at the right level of emotion as the other person, using the same nonverbals. That's why it actually works. And of course, when this happens over time, it leads to trust building. So, you know how to do it, but you don't do it at work very often because you don't think you have to. You're in control here, so of course no connection is actually required. When I run this most often, and when the world has run this most often, most of the words that come up are these: dominant, decisive, intelligent. These studies are repetitive and they're recurrent. When we think of people who lead in business, we think of dominance and intelligence. First thing. Also, you don't do it at work because you don't think you should. It's a waste of time. It's not about the work. It's about small talk. Why am I doing this? Because it's the conduit to influence. Warmth connects you to people. It opens them up to you. The simplest things like saying hello, the simplest gestures like smiling, even for a split second, make them connect you. What's the second part I said? After the ritual, openness, no negative judgment, people come out to you. And where connection and warmth are part of the organizational culture, trust and organizations flourish. And the high trust organizations on the 100 best firms to work for, Forbes or Fortune's, are always 2 times better in their market performance than standard market indices. These folks really know how to produce, right? And that's because, of course, culture eats strategy for lunch. I know you're taking all these courses on how to make change and how to do this and how to do that. The answer is, if you're working against the hidden assumptions of the organization, if you're working against what do I have to do to fit in around here, which is what your elephant works on, you can come to my course and be all thrilled about being a better communicator and go back to work on Monday morning and go right back without even thinking about it the way it was before. In fact, I used to warn people from my courses, don't go back and do this too much, too quickly. They'll just think you had my course, right? They'll think you've got religion. You don't want them to make fun of you. But it happens like this. Because, in fact, culture, organizational culture, is partly unique to the organization. They have their own histories. But of course, a lot of it's just imported from the general culture. High trust, connect cultures really stand aside from the general culture. The organizations stand aside. They're tremendously profitable and productive. And so I invited two of my favorite executives today, Tim Masson and Laurie Benefit. They're from the Ian Martin Group. Doing my research for the book, I needed a Canadian example of a high trust organization. And Laurie happened to write a blog on the first shot they got to get into the 100 best places to work in Canada. And she wrote a wonderful blog description of the firm. It's since 1959, one of Canada's premier recruitment firms in IT and engineering tech, about 135 employees according to their website. And here are the fundamental elements of culture that they think makes their organization actually work. Open door policy from the CEO down, inclusive, clear, transparent when it comes to making goals and strategies, focus on collaboration and family feeling among employees. I'll come back to that word in a moment. Hiring philosophy, no talented jerks, okay? So if you're smart, but you're a jerk, you ain't getting hired there. So as a result, you're surrounded by people you can trust. And they have a mission that matters, building authentic relationships and meaningful work. And they've certified themselves as a B Corporation to jack that mission up to be social responsible to their surrounding community. And the other thing is, within 5 minutes, I was sitting out there waiting for my appointments with Tim and Laurie. Laughter broke out twice in the offices for no good reason at all. Now, why would I say that's important? Because as I'm reviewing other firms, you'll see that laughter is a really common part of the life in the office for firms that actually have high trust and high connection things. And these firms have actually taken advantage of that and made tremendous amount of money by getting people typically to enjoy each other and have a good time. And that means laughter comes up. Laughter is not about jokes, even though I tried to give you one there. But in fact, it's about, it happens automatically when human beings suddenly have a common experience. Really, it's got very little to do with jokes. We've done some study of it. Very few things that people say to it are actually punchlines, but they laugh all the time because it's a bonding experience. Now, I read about them last year when they had entered the best places to work list in the 40s. This year, they're in the top 20 of the best places to work in Canada. So nice work, guys. I really appreciate it. They knew they had some work to do. They went and did it, and now they're in the top 20. And I'm sure, but next year they'll be in the top 10. That's the kind of place they are. So this is basically a summary of their. Yeah, just get out there and do that. So the Eaton Martin Group, this is the summary of their thing. There's another organization that learned from them because they were formed in 1959. There's an organization that was actually formed in 1995 that basically has the same cultural connections. It's called Google. I'm sure you may have heard of them. They're a small organization, but they do well. They call open door policy voice. Anyone can talk to anybody about anything. Transparency, trust your people, a mission that matters, which is organizing the world's entire information and making it accessible to everyone. It's an aspirational mission. And they hire for smart, humble, and conscientious. And you know what they tell their managers if they don't get that as part of their hiring? Look longer. Look more. Because if you don't build it in on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't sustain the fundamental assumptions that this is the way we need to be if we're going to build organizations. Now you can say, okay, Google, it's a big firm, it's exceptional. And Ian Martin Group's only 135 people. They can all get along well. That's not hard to do. Can you give me an example? I'm asking my own rhetorical question. I appreciate you asking this one. Can you give me an example of a large, down-to-earth retail firm, the kind of stuff where you really have to push people to get them to work, that really this works in? And of course, I'm going to give you one. This is Arthur DeMoulis' story. DeMoulis Supermarkets run a 71-food store chain in northern Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. They're big stores, big supermarkets. Arthur was appointed president and CEO. He's the son in the family because he has his father's middle name. The T stands for Telemachus, which is his father's name, the original founder of the company. He grew sales from $3 billion to $4 billion a year while he was CEO, added stores and employees from 14,000 to 25,000 employees, while major competitors were closing their stores. This guy is really good at what he does, okay? He's making the board a ton of cash. Now, he's also a classic manager. He's smart and dominant. He's a controller. But he only does this to the board members. He fights with his board members all the time because they're all family, right? I don't know if you've ever run a business with family, but things get a little edgy sometimes, right? He has to tell them periodically, there's only one boss in this company, and it's me. A classic CEO line. Because he's fighting to preserve the strong wages of employees. They make $4 more than the minimum wage for these states. They have a retirement plan, they get bonuses, and he still keeps the prices low. The workers thought he was great. Now, not just because he was fighting for them at the board. Most of them didn't even know that. but because they knew him personally. He was relentless about visiting the stores. This guy was never in his office, right? He was famous for his ability to remember names, birthdays, milestones. He asked about spouses and children. He attended many weddings and funerals. These are small towns throughout the New England states. Everybody knows that everybody sees him, right? He checked in on ill employees. In fact, there's a very dramatic story. Store manager Terry McCarthy described a call in the article about this thing I'm about to show you, where his daughter had a serious car accident. It was in the paper, so Arthur calls him and says, "How's your daughter doing? What about the hospital she's in?" And he said, the next thing I'll take to my grave, do we need to move her? And the we sounded like family. And Terry never got past that. Artie was smart but warm with his employees. He was smart and dominant with his board. He was smart and warm with his employees. He was the kind of guy, you'll love this, who could walk into a store, walk up to the 16-year-old who's stacking lettuce in the veggie department and go, "Hi, Jim, happy birthday." Turn around, walk over to his manager and say, "And why are we being undersold by 3 cents a pound on the corn across the street?" That's the kind of mind he had. And his relentless commitment to his employees actually made a tremendous difference. Because what happens, his dominance of his board turned them against him eventually, and his cousin leads a coup, and they overthrow him, and he's out by June 30, 2014. This happened last summer. His dismissal was part of a larger restructuring plan to cut costs, increase profits, and chop jobs. In other words, a standard private family firm feud. Until something happened that's unheard of in North American business.
Market basket! What are we here for? RDT!
Take a good look. You may not have ever seen anything quite like it. Workers protesting because their boss was fired.
ATD! ATD!
In June, the board of directors of Market Basket, a 71-store supermarket chain in New England, dismissed company president Arthur T. DeMoulis. The board controlled by Arthur T.'s cousin, Arthur S. DeMoulis, who wanted more of the profits to go to shareholders, less to employees. In what amounted to an epic family feud, Market Basket stores hemorrhaged money, an estimated $1 million a day, thanks to a customer boycott in sympathy with the employee walkout.
No one will ever walk out. 20,000 people will walk out for one man. And we did.
Now I want you to get this guy. This guy makes $12 an hour if he's lucky. This is all he has. He and these workers went on strike and did demonstrations for 6 weeks. No money coming in. And they managed to convince the customers not to go to the store, so the other side of the board would get the point. And they did. They lost so much money that they allowed Artie to buy them out, and he was CEO again. So the next time somebody tells you that connection talk doesn't work, that ordinary small talk doesn't work at work, you remember RDT. It not only works, but it's actually a form of beautifully connective power that you can use when you need it. People are willing to work for you. They're willing to open up to you. If you trust them and you persist in this process, they're willing to do anything for you, including give up 12 weeks of pay when they're poor people and have no other choices. It's not a waste of time. It's a cost. It's not a cost of doing business. Connect Talk is an investment in doing business better. And if you're not doing enough of it, this is your takeaway today. Go do some more. You know how to do this? Just start doing it. It works for several other companies you've never heard of either, right? Anybody fly Southwest Air? It went from a 3-plane out-of-money airline in Texas 25 years ago to being the U.S.'s dominant carrier in terms of domestic flights. How did they build it? Ask Herb Kelleher, the original founder. They built it on fun and love. He literally says this over and over again. You should see the parties they have for their employees. I mean, it's like Mardi Gras when they have an employee meeting, right? It's really something. And yet it works. He's now the most powerful airline in the United States. Also the one with the least amount of problems with unions and stuff like too. My favorite one is about 10 years ago, they had come to a milestone. I think it was Herb's retirement. They're in Texas and in Fort Worth, Houston. On the same day that the board of American Airlines is meeting, they're being picketed by the pilots union for their crappy working conditions. Across the street, across the town, another hotel, they're having a party for his retirement. And the same union takes out a $200,000 ad in USA Today saying, "Thank you so much, Herb." That's how that works. And Tony Hsieh, well, I'm not going to do the details here. It's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. He just simply takes a limping, not ineffective website that sells women's shoes to women online and turns it into a $2.2 billion a year powerhouse with less than 1,500 people. Can you say, this is about 1.7 million a person being represented here. Can you say that about your firm? Does all the headcount in your firm actually represent about 1.7 million in general sales? Because that's what Tony accomplishes, and he accomplishes by getting people to be happy. In fact, he has a wonderful book on it called Delivering Happiness, and we've already talked about Google and their success. My book explains all of this, but also shows you how to do Connect Talk when in the difficult situations. They're ones we actually hire managers for. When shit happens, I'm sorry, did I say that? Sorry. Our elephant spooked into the other talk we know how to do automatically. There are always two talks, right? There's the one that actually says when the wife says, please pass the ketchup, you get your own damn ketchup. That's called control talk. It's automatic, and we know how to do it. The only trouble is it always makes things worse. And even if you're thinking about that, guess what they're doing? They're reading you, right? You have to remember that the reading going on here is below the level of words. You start thinking bad thoughts about what you're going to do next and what they're acting as people, they get the message. And so what's happening here is your elephant's being spooked by whatever bad thing is going on in the situation, and I got to get the rider back on top here. And the way to do that is to use the only conscious talk we know how to do, which is called dialogue talk. Now, I describe it in detail in the book because it's the only talk that we know how to do that forces you to stay in the present. That little moment you had there when you were breathing, I show you how to do that before you talk, and also how to use your mind in order to stay in that present. Because when you're in a difficult situation, all that stuff that appears in your mind, stupid, idiot, what the hell's wrong with these people, they're always doing this kind of, all that comes from your past. It is not what's actually going on in front of you. I teach you how to stay in that particular moment because it changes the way you actually communicate with your body and your words. It also changes the way they read you, and that's the most important thing. And it compels you to change the context. If you can react through calm mind and dialogue talk, you have to remember that you are your employee's situation. So what you're doing here is you're changing that situation in that particular moment, and for the better. You get to practice the skills for this in the seminar. Now, there's no time to do it today, but I want to show you in a simple way how you can alter the effects of a very difficult situation. I'm going to give you a quick takeaway, last one a day, I promise. I can't do the words, but I can do the visuals. I said earlier that most of the input that your elephant getting comes through here, right? So in fact, what happens when you're in a really difficult situation with somebody? Don't do this, okay? If you're really having a struggle with somebody, do not make eye contact if you don't have to. If you have a desk and they're sitting in front of it, get out from behind your desk. Sit beside them in a chair, right? We have a name for that, it's called sidling, right? So that in fact you're not looking at each other's eyes, because you have to accept the fact that their unconscious mind and your unconscious mind is creating this feedback loop of this is going bad, this is going to get worse, holy crap, what's coming now? None of which is actually productive for helping them help you solve the problem. Right? Don't look at them if you can avoid it. When they walk in the office, say, I got the problem, or I've invited you because I want to tell you about this problem. Get out from behind your desk. Sit beside them if you can. And if that doesn't work, do what world leaders do. Didn't you see Obama and the president of China these days? Walk. If you live in a big enough office space, just say, let's go for a walk down the hall. Because your eyes are out here. Right? You're working on not falling down, which is a good step. But also, of course, the problem lies out there between you. You're more likely to calm their elephant down and calm your own by looking at a common problem. And the way you do it by moving is that you're compelling your elephant to spend some of its energy in keeping you vertical and not bumping into things. That's a very handy thing to do when you're actually trying to calm yourself down and also keep them calmed down. Simple, take away bad stuff, don't look them in the eye, sit beside them. If you can't do that, take them for a walk. I want you to learn how to manage mindfully. And I want you to remember that trust is a far greater motivator than anything you can pay them, any trips you can send them off to Honolulu on, and understand that the elephant mind provides our motivation. It comes from inside of us as an emotion, and it can only do that when it's certain of what's going on, and it feels a positive, persistent emotional connection with you of trust, with you and with the people around you. Get out of control and connect. Change the situation. The results will astound you and the other managers in your firm. Even if your firm is a more traditional firm, you do it. And thanks for keeping your rider focused for the entire time I was here. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.